You're a superhero whose superpower is de-escalation. You fight villains by talking through their issues and helping them to make better choices. Listen, I understand how you feel. Both men stood atop a 200-foot tall skyscraper. Above them, a gigantic array of perfectly precise death lasers loomed, ready to annihilate at a moment's notice. Vladimir the Dark turned quickly.
How could you? How could anyone? You don't understand what I've been through.
Our hero was patient. His experience kept him calm even as he recognized true panic in the man across from him. It was caused by the internal struggle that was always present when evil had taken root. I do not. That is correct. But I do understand what you are about to do. You are about to kill because you are insecure, weak without a release valve with which to purge those uncomfortable feelings.
Vladimir chuckled. The great hero came all the way here to tell me that I am insecure. I expected more.
You've never had control. Your father beat you, and your mother. You acted out in school, were expelled, and lost the ability to control your own destiny through achievement or excellence.
Vladimir's tone grew solemn. My father only beat my mother, never me.
And you could not save her from that. She is dead, then?
Vladimir shifted nervously, but shook his head. No, alive. She lives in an apartment in Lower Manhattan.
The gentle superhero let his heart bleed for the man. I bet it is hard for you to look her in the eye after everything you've seen.
It is harder knowing that there is nothing I could do to stop it. Nothing I can do to change what happened.
Vladimir the Dark stepped away from the annihilation console and lowered himself to the ground. Our hero moved slowly to his side and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. We all fight against the movement of events. This is a waste, I think. Instead, change the direction of future events. Be the rock in the river that diverts the flow. Do good things and watch as the world changes before your eyes. Vladimir looked deep into the hero's eyes. It was obvious that he wanted to change. The dark villain envisioned futures where he was different and capable of more kind pursuits. Kids, dogs, houses, love. All of the normal pieces of life flashed through his mind. He wept, then, and wished things were different. In the end, our hero made a brave decision. Instead of allowing Vladimir to kill all those that the laser pointed toward, he did it himself. The hero of heroes moved himself toward the console and pressed the button that triggered it all. The annihilation was swift and complete. When it was over, Vladimir the Dark, with tears still glistening underneath his eyes, asked why he did it. So that you wouldn't have to. Every morning, you wake up in the body of a random person, in a random location. You are aware of all their plans and ideas for the day, and have full control of the person. You keep the memories of your time spent in other bodies along the way. You just learned this isn't normal. That metallic taste is one of those things that really sticks with you. This isn't the first time I'd had a gun shoved into my mouth. But I can tell you that for poor Cassidy, this was a brand new experience. I know that she didn't deserve everything that had happened today, but in all fairness, today was an eye-opener for me as well. You see, it turns out I have a bit of a gift. Or at least, that's what I've decided to call it for now. The word curse makes me feel like a bad person, and I'm dealing with too much new information right now to try and weigh out the moral implications of the decisions I've made in my various life experiences. Up until this morning, changing lives was all normal for me. It was almost like some sort of reincarnation, where details from your previous life didn't have any direct effect on your current one. And so, I lived each life however I felt like that day. Some days I just went through the normal routine, and some days I would get wild and live out of the person's normal comfort zone. But as we woke up this morning, Our adrenaline started racing as Cassidy's memory of our previous day together came rushing back. She was scared. No, we were scared. Or maybe petrified was a better word. We sat there in bed for what seemed like an hour, but was probably closer to 5 minutes. The whole time the alarm kept blaring in the background, waking little Henry in the next room. I had been Cassidy before. I had always assumed that each day was a unique experience, that everyone just shuffled around to a new body and tried to keep the world going. But the terror I felt waking up as Cassidy again changed everything. I was immediately flooded with the memories of the last time I was here. It was about 3 years ago. She had been aware of the entire day I was with her, like a passenger in her own life. It had seemed like a normal day to me at the time, but all she remembers is having her body taken over for 24 hours like a waking nightmare. For the most part, I had lived her life in the normal way. I snoozed the alarm 2 to 3 times before dragging myself out of bed and into the shower. I got to try my favorite shampoo that leaves the hair feeling so soft it would make a chinchilla jealous. I took a little extra time getting my makeup just right, knowing that my boss wouldn't mind me walking in a few minutes late on a Friday. Because I thought that I would only be Cassidy for one day, I decided to take a few risks to try and spice up her life. For Cassidy, that meant finally getting up the guts to flirt with Scott. He worked in finance on the other end of the building, but they had shared more than a few inside jokes over the years. It was the usual light-hearted, office break room banter, but for a 31-year-old woman that had only a couple of short relationships under her belt, it was always the high point of her day. I could feel the longing for human companionship when I first spent the day as Cassidy. That's why I decided to invite Scott out with me and the girls that night 3 years ago. I always felt more confident after a couple of screwdrivers, and I knew that a few drinks would loosen him up as well. We remember the 4th drink getting handed to us by our waitress, but the rest of the night was a bit of a blur. We have memories of working our typical white girl moves out on the dance floor, and it didn't take long to realize that Scott was thinking the same thing that we were. We weren't normally the type of girl to go home with someone from the bar, but with Scott it was something we had been imagining for years. It was the best day of our lives. But the next day was absolute hell for poor Cassidy. She spent the whole weekend at home trying to come to grips with her experience with me at the wheel of her life. Over the following week, she confided in a few of her closest friends who all gave her that same look. She hated that look. They didn't believe her. Nobody did. Scott had already stopped even acknowledging her in the halls, so she needed to maintain a certain level of social standing if she hoped to keep her life together. She decided that it would be best to just pretend that nothing had ever happened. After about 4 months, it was less forced and more habit. She was starting to get back into a normal routine and get her life together when her doctor informed her that she was carrying little Henry. The next several months were just a blur. Scott denied any sort of responsibility, but Cassidy didn't really want that asshole to be part of the baby's life anyway. Years went by, and through parenthood, she had finally found the fulfillment in life she had been looking for. Milestones, birthdays, and even those long nights cuddling a sick baby had all formed the new life that Cassidy cherished so much. That's why we were panicking. We had something to live for now. We had convinced ourselves that it was just an off day, and there was no way someone could actually control our life. Now that I was back, we were terrified. But I was terrified for another reason as well. If I can remember being aware of everything the last time I was here, then that means that everyone I had ever been with had the same experience. It also means that what I do isn't normal. Nobody else jumps bodies every day. They get to live out one boring life from start to finish. Every high point in my life wasn't really my own. Does that mean I would never be able to find fulfillment like most people I had been with? Never having my own true experiences? Henry crying in the next room finally snapped us out of it. As I picked him up from his crib and stared into the eyes of the little man that had come into our life and finally given it meaning, I suddenly remembered poor Lucas. I had just been with him yesterday, and that 7-year-old boy had been trapped in that crazy man's basement for the last 2.5 years. It wasn't fair, and he had almost given up hope of being rescued. With my new realization that each of these lives had consequences, I knew that we had to do something to help him. We dropped off Henry with our mother for the day and started driving as fast as we could. Despite my newfound knowledge of consequences, we sped most of the way there. I could still feel the pain of the handcuffs around my wrists when I was with Lucas, and I couldn't stand the thought of him being in pain another moment. Unfortunately, my head was swimming too much with all of these life-changing realizations that even though it still took us about 16 hours to pass across 2 states, I hadn't really formulated more of a plan than busting the door down and confronting that maniac. It wasn't until he answered the door that we realized my mistake. He was probably just short of 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds. Not the strongest guy in the world, but towered over our 115-pound frame. Thinking only of Lucas, we started yelling at him and swinging our arms at him to give him the justice he most certainly deserved. Unfortunately, our attacks had little impact. Having woke him up in the middle of the night, it took him a second to realize that we knew the dark secret he was keeping in his basement. He quickly grabbed our suddenly weightless feeling frame and threw us inside the house. We went face first into a nearby bookshelf and fell to the ground. The pain was noticeable, but we were still working off of pure adrenaline. As we tried to get up, he grabbed our long brown hair and started dragging us down the hall. We tried to scream, but a quick kick to our side from his steel-toed boots left us at just a whimper. He dragged our weak body down the stairs to the basement I remembered so vividly. There, in the back corner of the room, was Lucas. He was much more frail-looking than I had remembered feeling yesterday. I guess the hope that had kept him going all these years had a direct effect on his self-perception. We didn't get much of a chance to take everything in before the man had thrown us to the ground, jumped on top of us, and shoved his pistol down our throats to stop us from fighting back. This isn't the first time I'd had a gun shoved into my mouth, but I could tell you that for poor Cassidy, this was a brand new experience. We had no choice but to submit, as the man tied us up next to Lucas. We looked over at the little guy, and as much as we would have loved to flash him a look of confidence, I'm sure he could see the look of despair plastered across our face. The man went back up the stairs, and after shutting the lights off, he closed the door, leaving us in the pitch blackness of his basement. We squeezed our eyes shut, trying to hold back tears. We may not have been physically strong, but we'd be damned if we weren't going to stay emotionally strong for little Lucas. We opened our eyes to address Lucas for the first time, but instead of a dark basement, I found myself staring at the ceiling of a jail cell. Carl had been a patient prisoner. He had been a violent man in his past, and despite still looking the part, he had tried to put the past behind him. He hated the small prison beds that weren't long enough for his 6-foot, 8-inch frame. He hated how no matter how much he worked out, he still woke up with a sore back from the worthless mattress. He couldn't wait to sleep in his own, comfortable bed again. This was going to be his last night in this dump, because this morning at 6 a.m., he was finally getting released. A smile crept across our face. Heaven and hell do exist after death, but you can choose in which you go. You jokingly choose hell, and when you arrive there, you hear Satan saying, "Finally, someone, a friend." "Hello!" I yelled into the darkness surrounding me. My voice rattled off unseen walls, deep rumbling echoes built up into a dreadful cacophony that seemed to swallow me whole. "Hello, hello, oh. My skin became goose-pimpled, and a shiver ran up my spine. "Please, I was joking. Death, if you're there still, please, please. Please, plead. I could feel cold rock wall to my right, but nothing in any other direction. With no other option, I plunged into the darkness, always keeping the wall within reach. The ground beneath me was uneven, and I had to step cautiously so as not to trip. As I walked, the stench of sulfur began to grow, soon intensifying and wrapping itself tightly around my throat. After a time, I sensed that the passageway was leading me downward. The wall itself began to twist, and I knew I was corkscrewing deep into the earth. No, not the earth. I was somewhere else. But if it was hell, why was it empty? I don't know how long I crept along in that dreadful, unrelenting silence, that blinding darkness, but eventually a dim orange light became visible some way below. I almost wept with relief. Gradually, as I descended towards the light, my surroundings became less dim, and I could see I was on a wide staircase of sorts, although a ramp might be more accurate, as there were no steps. I glanced down at my feet, and to my surprise, I recognized the sight of the black-gray ground I stood upon. It was a type of igneous rock, the type that forms when lava cools and dies. The ramp eventually led into a vast hollow carved out of black rock walls. It was much brighter in the room than the stairwell, although shadows danced menacingly on the walls. I saw first a great rock table in the center of the room, around which was a circular path of white ground, marked with the telltale black veins of marble. Around that, 12 skeletons rested against the chamber's walls, rusty chains around their necks bolting them to the rock behind. There were iron keys lying by each of their legs. Could they have freed themselves, but chose not to? I crept towards the table. On it lay the remains of a great skeleton, much larger than the others, its arms folded proudly across its chest. In its arms lay a longsword, its blade a shimmering crystal blue. The huge bones that must have once made up the creature's wings lay spread across the table's wide surface. An object rested on the creature's skull, the light source. It was almost blinding to gaze upon the chipped red teeth that made up the terrible crown. Each tooth shone like a fiercely burning ruby, like a flame. On the side of the table was carved an epitaph. Here lies the body of the morning star, bringer of light, the true Son of God. Long did he protect his children from the angels' lies. No longer he can. By his side rests his eternally loyal apostles. Here lies the body of the morning star. He awaits to be avenged. He awaits a friend. I don't know how long I sat in that room, surrounded by death with my arms wrapped tightly around me. Hours, at least. Days, perhaps. I don't know why I eventually got to my feet and removed the crown of teeth from the skull and placed it on my head. But I did. And as skin around my shoulder blades ripped and bled to reveal the growths underneath, as the eye sockets of the 12 skulls around the table began to flame and smolder, as I picked up the sword from the skeleton on the table and saw in my mind's eye the death of God and the angels' crimes, I realized that everything was about to change. When in doubt, increase available firepower. You are requesting what? The voice crackled in the comm unit embedded in my ear, part of the oral and optical enhancement suite I had been implanted with. I am requesting permission to activate the Onikuma. I pulled my hypercycle over, locking my target on my optical HUD, waiting for the unlock codes. Why would you possibly need to activate that? Command's voice crackled in my head, and I chuckled before uploading the video recording of the last 5 minutes. A rampage. That was the only way to describe it. There was a brief pause as the video was reviewed, before I heard a sigh. Authorization granted. Please limit collateral damage, Miku. I grinned and flipped my ponytail back as I heard the command, reaching down to the oversized compartment on my cycle, keying the unlock code. I promise I'll try. Smiling, I hoisted the Onikuma, the demon bear, unlocking the various components and linking it to my HUD. There, in the distance, the massive horned figure had picked up a car and was shaking it, trying to get at the soft organics inside. His plasteel and carbon fiber armor glinted in the neon, its clean lines broken by the sword cuts and the blood stains. Locking on, I connected the Onikuma to my cycle's hydrogen fuel cell, feeling the humming as the capacitors charged. Miku, we have ordered a cleanup team to your location. In my ear, the voice of command crackled again, and I nodded. It'll be just a moment. Seeing the charger bar on my HUD, I settled myself, locking my various implanted joints into place before deploying my hypercycle stabilizers. There was a soft humming noise that grew louder, eventually reaching the ears of my target, who turned, its mauve servo teeth whirring as it roared in anger. It recognized me as a danger, something instinctive from the part of its brain that was still organic. It screamed, a roar both primal and feral, amplified by the speakers in its throat and the reactor at its core. It tossed the car to the side and began to rush me, hoping to eliminate the source of danger it felt. Too late. Grinning, I depressed the trigger, feeling the heavy blow on my shoulder as the electromagnetically accelerated brick of tungsten flew forth at a percentage of light speed. Shockwaves exploded outward, instantly shattering the glass windows and neon signs in a series of explosions. The creature raised all 4 of its arms to try and block, but even super composites and future tech armor were useless. The round blasted through its guard, ripping a hole the size of my cycle through its chest, hurtling it backward. The instant the round made contact, it exploded into 97 shards of tungsten and plasteel, the Kuma claw round ripping the creature to pieces. It didn't even have time to scream before it was blown apart. Metal, flesh, blood, and hydraulic fluid covering the street. Command, this is Miku. I sagged backwards, rubbing my shoulder as I lowered the Onikuma. Even with my implants, it still kicked like a beast, and I looked down, noting with interest that my cycle and I had slid back several meters by the recoil, even with the locking braces deployed. Miku, this is Command. Go ahead. I started disconnecting the Onikuma, looking at the wreckage scattered across the street. Oni is down. Repeat, Oni is down. There was an audible sigh of relief on the other side of the line before I continued. Send a sanitation team as well. Civilians on site. Roger that, Miku. Command acknowledged my presence as I packed away the Onikuma, relocking the weapon according to protocol. Wait, we have another contact. It's coming from the bay. Another one? I raised an eyebrow in surprise as the overlay on my HUD was updated with a blinking dot in the middle of Tokyo Bay. I'm on it. Roger that, Miku. Command confirmed my deployment. This time, try and handle it the old-fashioned way. Slinging my leg over my hypercycle, I felt the thrum of the ignition as my free hand idly reached back and grasped the handle on my mage blade. The old-fashioned way. Roger that, Command. Grinning, I felt the cycle roar beneath me as I sped away from the darkened street, already swarming with gawking onlookers. As I headed towards the bay, I couldn't help but smile. 2 in 1 night. They'd definitely have to approve my vacation request after this. You have discovered that after you do a good deed for someone, an hour later, something bad happens to them. Splinter, divorce, death, etc. You finally decide to stop helping anyone for good. This counts as a good deed done to everyone and everything. I didn't think it through, really. The consequences of my actions. I just wanted to be kind. Really, I think that's all I really wanted. To express care for another. To participate in another's life. It started proportional, but always grew exponentially. Pick up a fallen paper for a classmate, they drop their pencil. Pick that up too, they later drop everything going to their locker. Stay and help them pick up, backpack tears. Carry some of their things, they get paper cuts. Bandage their wounds. I always thought it odd, growing up, that I was the only one who seemed to notice. I kept thinking it may all be in my head, that I was imagining things in some morbid attempt at individuality. Greet a friend who seemed down and listen to them, their other friends ignore them. Stay with them so they don't feel lonely, they develop clinical depression. get others involved to help keep their spirits up. They all avoid and isolate both of us for being a burden. Contact professional help and offer to pay for their sessions. It was real. It was all real. The coincidences just kept piling up. Why didn't I notice sooner? Why the hell am I the first to notice? Hour intervals. That was the other thing. It'd always get worse an hour or so later. Hold the door open for someone going in, they trip and fall going out. Help them up, they get into a car accident. Call 911. It's sick. It's sick and it's twisted and it's wrong. Deeply and profoundly wrong. I don't know when it finally clicked, but I froze at the full realization. Do something, something bad happens. Do something more, something worse. And then something far worse happens. I really thought it would be simple. Just stop. Do nothing. Nobody will get hurt then. But do nothing for the sake of others? The fires start. God, the fires. And they grow and they spread and they spread and they scream to be put out, and you try and they grow bigger, and you don't try and they grow bigger, and you run to warn the others, and it follows you, and so you stand and they race ahead and they all scream and they scream, and there's nothing you can do and nothing you can't do, and it's all because of you, and you think you can end it by ending yourself, but then you realize that would make everything worse, so you press on to avoid that, and so everything gets worse, and it won't stop, it just won't stop, and they won't die, because death would be a mercy. If I kill them, they come back. If I let them burn, they burn eternal. I didn't think it through, really, the consequences of my actions. Not here. I see that now. I've not been alive for some time. My time for choice has long passed. This is hell. I am forever longing to love, and am forever denied that. There is no escape. There never will be. There never can be. And with that realization, the sulfur fills my nose and the flames consume me too. I look up to see the devil sneering, reveling in this game, and I, in all my agony, sneer back. I still want to be kind. This story was written by Happy in My Head. This next story was written by Savage Autumn. I still remember the second it happened. I'd made my decision. I'm going to be an asshole, I thought. No more helping anyone or doing anything good. I remember standing in my bathroom, hands on my hips as I made my decision. And suddenly the world went quiet. Noise vanished from my ears, like it was sucked out of my head by a vacuum, and an impending sense of doom draped over my shoulders. It was only for an instant that I looked in the mirror, silence in the air, yet I felt like I'd been there long enough to map out every inch of my face. Then the screaming. It split the air, my hands flung to my ears, and I curled into myself. Falling backwards into my bathtub, I smacked my head on the wall behind me. The realization hit me like a punch in the mouth. What have I done? The explosion started next. People's gas lines and cars and ovens started exploding with no explanation, killing thousands. Cars lost control, spinning down highways and suburban streets. Parents started fighting, even hitting and killing each other, or their kids. People turned on each other. World leaders started getting assassinated. People started getting mugged, assaulted, tortured. Employees dropped dead in the middle of their jobs. Parents found dead children. Everyone all over the globe had their worlds fall apart. Now it wasn't just people. Animals started dropping dead in shelters, birds falling from the sky. Dogs and cats became rabid in an instant, attacking their owners and family, infecting and killing. Animals broke out of zoos and attacked visitors or died or got injured. Tigers and elephants raiding villages. Packs of wolves ate each other alive. I sat in my home untouched, watching it all unfold before me. Flicking through news channel after news channel, watching reporters develop blisters and boils over their whole bodies live on TV. Others sobbing at the news of dead relatives, shaking cameras as the studios shook from exploding pipelines. "Armageddon is before us! Repent for your sins! Pray to the Lord!" a pastor yelled outside one of the studios. "Repent! Repent!" His voice trailed off to the sobbing voice of the journalist, shaking at her knees and clutching her chest as she started having trouble breathing. "Nuclear war is upon us. Get it inside." She fell to the floor, foaming at the mouth and seizing. The camera didn't cut out. I sat and watched her for too long. Nukes were being fired for random continents, or malfunctioning and blowing up their own countries. Australia had been lost that way. Good thing, I guess. The animals would have killed everyone anyway, and then themselves. I changed the channel. Then the bacteria started fighting. People became zombies, spontaneously developed cancer-ridden bodies. Some got cured of their cancer, then died as all the bacteria in their body was killed instantly. Diseases started clashing like the animals. Scientists rushed to understand and were killed in the process. It didn't matter anymore. The nukes would kill us all now. So I sat and waited. I briefly wondered if this would be considered another good decision, another good deed bound to end someone's life. It doesn't matter anymore, I thought. Nothing matters. Too many paradoxes no matter what I did. This was bound to happen, just like every other bad thing I'd caused was. This was Armageddon, an extinction, a fate. Who knew? I could see the lights in the distance of the explosion, the light growing and growing, brighter and brighter and brighter, and everything was white, then black, then nothing. Thank you for listening.